Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Surfside Recovery Podcast. My name is Brian Licata, and we just wanted to let you guys know that if you or anyone is struggling with addiction, to please reach out to Surfside. You can give us a call at 609-709-4205 or visit us at surfside.org and all of our social media platforms. All right, everybody, we're back. Round two with Devin Reaves. Our episode last week is the prequel.
This week.
Yeah.
5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Technically.
Just happened. We went outside. Everyone used the bathroom.
Smoke break, and
now we're back at it. So where do we leave off?
Devin wanted to talk about
harm reduction and recovery.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Ian kind of touched on the idea that recovery and harm reduction are foreign but overlapping.
Yeah, and I also will say I don't like calling the one recovery and the one harm reduction.
Sure.
Like I think the umbrella, right, is recovery.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
Because even though I don't particularly like it, I do kind of believe that like you're in recovery if you say you're in recovery.
Sure.
However, I think there's a difference between harm reduction, right, versus abstinence-based.
So
I don't even know what I would call it. Like,
So I want to flip that on its head.
I even think there's a difference between like just being abstinent and also really trying to strive to be the best person that you can be.
Right. And so I want to flip that on its head, that the big umbrella is actually harm reduction, because the least amount of harm possible you can do interacting with drugs is not doing them.
Yeah.
Right. And, we see all kinds of people that are on a path to self-growth and wellness. Sometimes that comes from yoga, exercise, Tony Robbins books, whatever. CrossFit. And I think the idea that they're separate is part of the problem that we have as a society. And holding up abstinence-based recovery. I mean, how many times abstinence-based recovery is this gold standard? How many times you met a guy who's got 20 years sober and he's fucking miserable? Mm-hmm. Right?
But is he miserable because he's an asshole, or is he miserable because he's not doing something right for recovery?
I think there's probably a lot of answers to that, but
Probably both.
Right. I think that equating the number of days that somebody has concurrently not using drugs is a shitty metric. We want to look at tangible quality of life.
Yeah.
Right? Is the person housed?
Yeah.
Do they have access to medical care? Do they have access to mental health care? Do they have access to dental care? Yeah. Right? And so on and so forth. And, a lot of people in recovery say to me, that harm reduction stuff or MAT is garbage. And I was hoping that me and you could chew the fat on that a little bit,
He agrees.
I agree.
I think that, if we want to stop the overdose epidemic and stop going to our friends' funerals, that we really need to get organized for change. When I've been doing this work for about 8 years, and from the very beginning, I saw it as a need for a political shift. When we talked about Obamacare as a great example that really changed the way the state responded to people who use drugs. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, we had more people with access to health care. And there have been lots of reports, which are kind of no-brainers. States that expanded access to health care have less overdose deaths and saved a lot of money. And then we look at states like Florida, which have not expanded access to health care, and they're having a lot of problems getting people well. And that's something to talk about, that, also there's a political side to this, and that's, really where I like to hang out.
Yeah, because, it's an interesting thing that you say that, because there's going to be a lot of people who are like, well, if we expand that healthcare, like I have to pay because this kid does drugs.
Sure.
The reason I'm still alive is because of Obamacare, because my health insurance got extended until I was 26, and fortunately I didn't overdose in the time that I went to a bunch of different treatment centers and then got well. But also as a small business owner, the last thing I want to do is take away more of my income to pay for other people to do the same.
Right.
So it's like it's a really weird situation. Like, I directly benefited from other people's tax dollars. But now, when the time comes, like I'm not really trying to take out 40 or 50% of my paycheck to pay for stuff like that.
So we're actually, fun fact, we're talking to very slowly. I've been trying to get in front of somebody who is willing to run a pilot program on Surfside with insurance. The barriers I keep falling into is that I someone knows someone and I meet with that someone and then they're like, oh, by the way, my lobbying fee is $20,000 or
Sure.
one guy even told me $40,000 and there was no guarantees.
Right.
Which is like dumb money. Currently I'm talking to a family who potentially has a connection, but ultimately my pitch is like, look, if so our data, so that's what I pulled out here. So if a resident stays at Surfside for 4+ months, I don't even know how to read this. Basically, 55. So there's the way this graph is. Basically, what this is saying is roughly 74% of the people who come through Surfside don't return to residential treatment within that year.
Right.
So this is broken out between like if they stay like under a month, if they stay 1 to 4 months, 4+ months, and this is based off of 148 residents that have walked through the door between May of 16 and March of 2019. So if they stayed 3 days, 2 days, 1 day, they're on this. They're included into this data. And so my B for my argument is like, look, you're paying $30,000, $80,000, like whatever it may be, multiple times a year. You could save X amount of dollars if, whether they stayed sober or not.
Right.
But like also what some of this data is showing is that, guys have access to
Education.
clinical services, medication, medical compliance. Oh, you've put some of these graphs together. So what else did we do? Education, we check.
Yeah, education, employment,
like all that type of stuff.
Right.
Once they complete. So...
And so, what we're talking about, we see already happening in hospitals. So, if a hospital does a heart transplant, and that person dies within the year, they get paid much less. If that person is readmitted, they get paid much less. And so, we're talking about protecting the investment we make in individuals, and that's why long-term treatment matters, right? And the same argument could be made for harm reduction. A person that doesn't get hepatitis C, much cheaper. A person that doesn't get HIV. And, we often talk about the continuum of care beginning at detox. And all I want to do is continue that out to a earlier level, right?
Yeah.
Let's pull people out of the river that are drowning sooner and then set them on a long path of recovery that includes a recovery residence that gives them wraparound services. And I do think that young adults are at this place where we should invest heavily, right? We should want to spend double, quadruple the amount we spend on a 30-year-old guy or a 40 or a 50-year-old guy because the savings can be stretched out across their lifetime, right? There's an argument to be made for all of that. And the problem in our field is that we often make the heartstrings argument and not the smart financial argument.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we see Care and Treatment Centers now is in network with all of the Blues. Right.
Well, they also had 200 beds and were $37,000 a month, and that's got to get hard to fill.
Sure, it is,
especially when there's like 3 times the amount, 4 times the amount.
But there was a time for many years that they were cash only and did all right.
But there was also half the treatment centers that are around now.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we need to be working towards a sustainable model that takes these amazing programs like yours and makes them available to not just rich kids.
Yeah.
And that's what I want, right?
And the truth is, like, we're not even the program for rich kids. That's Turnbridge, Westport House, Foundation House in Portland, Manor of Hope. Like, we get the middle class, upper middle class kids. But the reality of it is like, how do we make it accessible for really anybody who wants that type of recovery? And it's crazy to think about, like, our day rate is almost equivalent to the Medicaid rate. Reimbursable rate,
right?
And like the guys at John Brooks or Patterson in Turning Point, they're on like bunk beds, squeaky, spring mattresses, basically in a warehouse type of environment all day. And our guys are in memory foam beds and going to play paintball and CrossFit in the gym.
Yeah, that's how recovery should be awesome.
So we looked at what's interesting is we looked at maybe 2 years ago, give or take a year and a half ago, we looked at purchasing a facility down in Dennis Creek Township.
The paintball, John, right?
No, we have that.
Okay.
We looked at a facility, and we wanted to do a young adult, like 18 to 26 type Medicaid-based residential program. It would have had about 30 beds.
Okay.
And we wanted to basically do the exact same thing we do, just for Medicaid. It's absolutely not possible. You need to have 100 beds.
Right.
There's no way to make the numbers work, to pay the staff and to do what's necessary. So, our system has again set us up in this position to fail.
Right.
Because you need psychiatrists and doctors and nurses, and our biggest overhead is our labor. We have 12 full-time staff, 2 part-time. How do you, God forbid, and a lot of our guys, it's like those entry-level jobs. Mm-hmm. But God, if you add to like nurses, we have 2 licensed drug and alcohol counselors, myself and Dan on staff. We have a total of 4 guys with master's degrees, not counting Tony, who's also licensed and a master's level. God, add like psychiatrists and doctors and nurses to that. It's like there's no way we could do what we do.
And that's part of the advocacy work I do is highlighting how the system is broken, and encouraging the state to do pilot programs that work. Something like 40 to 60% of people, depending on the state and community, are on private insurance, which is the wild, wild west. And I spend a lot of time talking about people that have less resources, but there's a lot of people that can afford good programs, and far too many of those programs are really dangerous. We think that on top of all of the excellent clinical resources and psychoeducational groups, we should also be doing naloxone distribution out of treatment. We should be doing hepatitis C testing, HIV testing, and also information which I would call safer drug use. Like, hey, Johnny, we don't want you to ever use drugs again, but if you do, don't mix alcohol and benzos. Don't mix benzos and heroin.
Don't do a full bag of dope the day you get out of treatment. Right. Do a quarter of a bag.
Correct. Yeah. Start low, go slow. And that, I think, has been one of the most interesting interplays between harm reduction and recovery.
Well, it's also, that fun fact with the AA Big Book, right? If you go back to 1939, they basically warn us and they say, like, you're not going to relapse when things are bad, you're going to relapse when things are good.
Sure.
Right? So in the story more about alcoholism, chapter 3, it talks about 2 guys, life is really good and they relapse, and then one guy's got the resentment and one guy, the jaywalker, just can't stop. Right? So it basically is saying that 50% of the people are going to relapse when things are good.
Right.
But we never talk about that. Right? Mm-hmm. We constantly spend all this time looking at our stressors and our triggers and the things that are problematic. And when was the last time you heard a guy raise his hand in a meeting and say, oh my God, I'm dating this smoking hot blonde. I'm getting laid twice a day. I just got a raise at work. I'm getting a new car. So I'm going to more meetings and I'm calling my sponsor more.
Right. No, never.
He's nowhere around. Right. Because, and that's the guy, unfortunately, that's our young adult who gets out of rehab. Things are so good. He's with his hot new girlfriend from rehab, just got a job. Why bother go to a meeting?
Right.
Why bother be involved in recovery? Because you feel so good that, maybe I can have a Coors Light. It's just one. Heroin was my problem.
Right.
And next thing you know, it's like they're shooting dope and they don't have a clue why.
What do you have to say to the people who recover or about the people that recover naturally? So, I've met a lot of people who had a problem with heroin and now drink okay or smoke cannabis irregularly, because not everybody recovers through the 12 steps, right? We're seeing people recover through smart recovery. What are your thoughts on that?
I have a good friend of mine who I used to get high with, and he he did, I want to say like a year-long Suboxone taper. He was sniffing heroin, sniffing pills. He did a year-long Suboxone taper, drinks occasionally, and smokes weed occasionally too. Right. But he's got his, he owns and operates his own business. I don't really want to give too much about it away. He seems fine. Like go for it. And, I talk to people that I meet like in the rooms all the time. And, my personal philosophy is like, if something's working for you, just like rock with it. You know what I mean? Why should it really matter that much to me what you do? That's what I think.
I think so again, right, for the guys who are in Surfside, who watch this podcast, I'll never tell somebody who's wound up in a addiction treatment center or addiction treatment program, I'll never tell them or encourage them to use any mood or mind altering substance ever. Because the reality of it is most people who get to the point where they have to go to rehab can't manage any substance safely.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. You don't see me out experimenting,
Well, for me, the reality of it is like, for me, it's like, am I willing to lose what I have?
No.
But for the guy who's like 90 days sober, who's not tickled pink because he's not a CEO yet, for him, it's like, oh, well, screw this. Like, right. I'm not and that's the problem we have at Surfside. Like, our guys, they've never been able to hold jobs for the most part. And they wonder why they're not getting $40 an hour the day that they're allowed to look for work. And so they can get that, like, well, fuck it. It's like, I don't have anything to lose anyway. And I just, again, it's like, look at your past experience, right? It's not so much like, can you or can't you? It's look at your past experience. Do you experience that thing we called the phenomenon of craving? The phenomenon being, right, when I start, I can't stop, but also the phenomenon being like, when I have a little bit of blank, I end up using a lot of blank.
Oh, that's
right.
Me. That's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, like, and I think that's why, a lot of people in 12-step recovery will use the term physical allergy, but that's not what the literature says. The literature calls it a phenomenon of craving.
Sure.
And that, like, to the state of Colorado, right? It is, the majority of the state of Colorado is not falling down drunk or shooting dope because they're smoking pot, right? They don't experience that phenomenon. However, when I smoke a little bit of pot, I experience the phenomenon of craving, which is like, I want to drink alcohol and chew on Klonopins.
Right. Yeah. Get 2 beers in me. I want to see the Coke Man for an 8-ball.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
And so this idea of like, can people manage? Sure. Like, you got to ask yourself, what's the risk?
Sure. And I don't have an answer to this. These are the things I struggle with. Because AA has permeated itself into our criminal justice system. So, for example, you see people who get a Dewey and then are mandated to AA meetings. I don't think it's good for them, nor do I think it's good often for AA. AA is supposed to be a thing where I'm given an option and I choose that.
Sure.
I really started my recovery journey in South Florida, and I think about a good fellowship should be an upside down triangle, right? So there should be, and the vertical axis is the amount of time people have, and the y-axis is the number of people, right? So there should be more people with more time, right? And less people with little time, so the group can really absorb all of the trauma and everything that's going on with that person and be a healthy place.
If you look at the membership survey,
right,
back to that, 49% of the room has a year under.
Right. And so what we have now is we've got many more people with less time and very few people with a lot of time. It becomes like a normal triangle. And I think that's not good for the culture of AA, because we've lost, like the first 100 guys use drugs.
Yeah.
You know, like there's that one story where the guy like shoots up in his fucking car and tries to stumble up to his room before he passes out. And now I see sometimes, you know, AA meetings like, don't talk about that drug shit. You know what I mean? Like, how many purist alcoholics have we met?
And we're lucky down here because we don't have that. But again, like 12-step recovery is this, like, if you want what we have. And
right. Attraction rather than promotion.
Yeah, and so me and my wife were talking about it the other night. Like, so Surfside, like, we won't, like, if somebody's like, yeah, I'm not doing the 12 steps, like, I'm not interested, like, they're not even qualified to come.
Sure.
Right? So that's fine. You can do recovery any way you want, but, like, we're the wrong program.
Sure.
But me and Alyssa were talking the other night about, like, sponsorship, and I think she's got, I don't know, like 10 years sober, and I'm going to come up on 15 next month, and like the need to go to a meeting is gone.
Right.
Like I don't even identify to people who are like with significant time in meetings saying, wow, I really needed to be here tonight. Like that just hasn't been my experience in a long, long time. You know, I go so I can continue to give back, but I think what happens to people who really embrace 12-step recovery is they slowly drift away, not necessarily out of a desire to drift away, but because life gets good, right? And all those things you wanted in recovery, I
fall under that category big time.
You know, the downfall is that some people drift so far away that they forget their roots, right? And they start to play that game that we just talked about. Like, well, maybe it wasn't a big deal. You know, maybe now, you know, I'm 10 years sober, and you know, it's like
I was 24 then.
I was a kid, and maybe I can have a beer, and next thing you know, it's like their life is a train wreck, and
which I've seen,
or maybe it's not. You know, and so I think like all these things are like really, really dangerous. It's like, and again, like the whole thing of addiction is like, if you start to mentally play that, like, well, maybe it's not a big deal, maybe I can, like, you're gonna do it. It's game over at that point. And for me, it's almost like, well, what's the point?
Right.
Like, if I'm thirsty, there's a million things I can drink besides alcohol.
Right, which is actually a diuretic.
Right. Yeah. You know, if I'm comfortable with who I am, and I'm comfortable in my sobriety, why do I need to alter the state? Because I can have fun snowboarding. I can have fun going to the gym. I do all these cool things. I can travel. And so why would I need to alter my consciousness to feel okay with my current circumstances?
Okay.
If I need to alter my current circumstances, then there's clearly something wrong.
Right.
Right. For me, and the way I explain addiction to people is the unmanageability is the root of our problem, right?
Sure.
It's like restless, irritable discontent when we're abstinent.
Right.
So if I need to, the most unmanageable thing that's ever going to happen to me in my life is that I can't sit still by myself at perfect peace and ease.
Right.
So if I'm X amount of months or years sober and I'm so obsessed with altering my state of consciousness, I'm in trouble.
Sure. I mean, I can't even remember what it feels like to be high. Like, it's been so long.
Yeah.
You know, which is such a wild thought to me. So the other thing, I don't know how we're doing on time, that I really wanted to talk about is, you know, AA is very much this individual path, right? And I spend a lot of time thinking about kind of the macro or the society-wide. And, you know, I don't know if everybody's following a lot, but we have the Democratic primaries happening right now. We had Iowa today, New Hampshire's coming up. And I'd love to talk a little bit about politics and addiction, if you are open and have time.
Sure.
Yeah. So, you know, looking at the candidates, I always got some shit to talk about.
I have to be full transparency. So, and whether this is good or not for the podcast, I am a Republican.
Okay.
I absolutely fucking hate Donald Trump. I think he is a complete fucking loser. And quite honestly, he's super embarrassing.
Sure.
The majority of my life until, and prior to Surfside, when I started to do my own business, I was much more Democrat.
Sure.
I also find like if there is like Democrat is on the left and then Republican is on the right, I'm literally like one notch over.
Yeah, right of center.
I'm one because like I've worked at methadone clinics, I've worked for state funded detoxes, like I've worked with indigent folks who absolutely need a leg up. But on the flip side of the coin, when I look at how it's tough to give my employees raises because we got to give so much money, and we're a nonprofit, and we still have to give so much money for employment taxes.
Right.
That's tough. So I'll start with that.
Okay.
I also have become so frustrated with the current political state that I pretty much don't pay attention. Once it gets close to voting, I'll do a little research on see who I'm going to vote, and I may vote Republican, I may vote Democrat.
Sure.
Right now, it's looking like as a Republican, I will probably vote Democrat.
Sure, at the top of the ticket at least.
Yeah. But I'll tell you this. I lived in Burlington, Vermont for X amount of years while Bernie Sanders was governor up there, and things were good. Things were great. I think he's a little delusional in some of his ideas, but I think he could be good. I don't know what his stance is on addiction.
Sure.
Probably mean, that everyone should just smoke weed. And
so I would say that, strictly from a policy perspective, and if anybody's really interested in where the Democratic candidates are on different pieces of drug policy, check out the website of the Iowa Harm Reduction Coalition. They did a survey of all the candidates and interviewed a couple of them, which I thought was pretty good. I think Bernie's got a pretty good head on his shoulders when it comes to drug policy, just on the back of access to healthcare as an issue. Ultimately, the acute part of substance use disorder or addiction where you're medically compromised requires a medical intervention. Yeah. Whether you're physically dependent on alcohol, physically dependent on opioids, benzodiazepines, you need an intervention that requires medical help. And far too many people, you got to have the hookup to get access to healthcare, right? And so I think Medicare for all would fix that. I also think that
Medicaid or Medicare?
Medicaid would fix that, and I think that.
But you can get Medicaid. All you got to do is sign the paperwork.
But there's also what's called like financial requirements. So the thing about Obamacare that made it special was not only that it increased the age that you could stay on your parents' insurance, but it also opened up the margins of people that could access it.
Right, and you can get credits based off of what your income.
Correct.
Your income
yeah,
is.
But it's like when somebody calls and asks for help to get to rehab, and they're like, "I have no insurance."
Sign
like,
up.
You have none.
Right.
Like you don't even have Medicaid. Like all you got to do is sign the forms.
I hear you, but a lot of people don't know that. So like,
So you're saying like you would just automatically have it,
right? As opposed to like in some countries, you turn 18, you're automatically enrolled to vote.
Got it.
In America, because we suppress the vote, you have to jump through hoops to become a registered voter.
Got it.
So I think that would change things. And, for many years, it was, addiction isn't a political issue. And as I watch my friends go to jail, disproportionately people of color and things like that, I think that Bernie Sanders has a smart idea on criminal justice reform, but probably not as good as Elizabeth Warren. Being a lawyer, being a policy wonk, and this isn't electability, right? These are just politics. And I think kind of rounding out the top three is Peter Buttigieg, Mayor Pete. I think he understands drug policy very well. Even though he's more centrist, I think those are the three people that people in recovery should be looking at as potential candidates. And I don't think that Biden is horrible. I just don't think that he's bringing forward new ideas.
Who's on the Republican ticket?
Yeah,
it's just going to be Trump.
Yeah, it's just going to be Donald Trump. And
it doesn't really matter.
Shockingly, some of the things that Donald Trump has done have been really, really good. He's talking a lot about criminal justice reform. If you watch the Super Bowl, there was a commercial about his work with criminal justice reform. Donald Trump administration supports needle exchange. He pledged during the last State of the Union about a year ago to end AIDS in the next 10 years, which is totally doable, right? That is a preventable disease that we can prevent the transmission of. We can get people to zero detectability and zero transmittability. I think some of the things that are happening inside of the Trump administration are trying to fix big government, and sometimes big government is what is needed. You know, I watched a video online last night of China building a hospital, in air quotes, and it's really like a center where they're going to send everybody who has the coronavirus because they want to quarantine them from people that are uninfected. And they spent, probably millions of dollars to build this in 8 days. That is a public health response.
That is crazy.
Right. And that requires state dollars, but we're trying to contain this. And we haven't seen that level of response from the Trump administration when it comes to
administration.
No, right. Obama didn't do it either.
Yeah.
Right?
Any administration.
And I think that really the only person that has a vision to do something like that from a funding perspective is Elizabeth Warren, though we might get it out of Bernie as well.
She's going to take the funding from people on Wall Street to do it. She's going to try to, and it's not going to happen. And that's the thing with all of these things is that, they have these great ideas, but have no actual way of pursuing it. And, I always talk about when people were talking about like this Medicare for all, this and that. Like look at the DMV in any state. It's a state-run organization, and people think that any of these other organizations are going to be different than that.
Sure.
Like when the American government sticks their hands in something, they turn it to shit.
They do mess up a lot of things. I do, as somebody that interacts with a lot of government, I can agree with that. I think, I think my struggle is I look at a company like Amazon, right? I mean, how much money have you spent on Amazon this year alone?
Do you have any idea how much like Amazon wastes? Have you seen some of those documentaries?
Sure. And so,
a quarter of the returns to Amazon get trashed.
Right.
Because it costs too much to resell it.
Right. And so, or they put it in boxes and sell it as,
a quarter of the
wild
stuff, 75% gets resold or restocked. 25% just gets trashed.
Yeah.
Perfectly good things.
Right.
Trashed.
And so, Amazon had this sweetheart deal in New York where they were going to get all these tax breaks and so on and so forth. But they were, what were they going to contribute as an organization to the local economy? I think that we do want Amazons to come to places, right? We want to support the next Amazon that's growing in Philadelphia, but they should have to pay their fair share because they use our roads. They use our educational system to educate their employees, right? They're linked to the public in an inextricable way.
Yeah, I mean, if you try to tax them, they're just going to pick up and move their business out of the country. Which is what happened in the 90s.
Which is about them being a shitty human being and un-American, not about the politics. I don't love paying taxes either. Like, I do not make a huge salary. And I have somebody in my company that makes as much money as I do, right? He doesn't bring in as much money as I do, but he makes as much money as I do. I have to raise his salary and then everything on top of that, fucking taxes, this, that, and that sucks.
Yeah.
Right? But I choose as an employer to make just like you choose to pay your employees, as much as you can. And I think it's not a political problem. It's a lack of leadership problem in so many businesses. I mean, Jeff Bezos, at some level, he's saying I could pay my fucking employees more and I could make $1 billion less. Like, at what point do we say that some of these guys are like human equivalent of dragons sitting on their ward? And is that good? Because a lot of times we're not talking about taxing anybody but like 50 or 60 people a little bit more, right? The human dragons of the world. And I'm okay with that. Like, I mean, how much college debt do you have, Ian?
You don't want to know.
No, come on. I have $200,000 worth of college debt.
It's not that much,
right? Because I went to fucking Penn, so
at its peak it was 117.
Right, and I've paid down 10,000 in 5 years, and I've been paying the entire time.
Yeah,
I don't think it's sustainable, the system we have now, to straddle young people with $100,000 worth of debt, especially now. You can't even buy a house because of your college debt. They told that against you. That was a change from when we were younger. I'm not sure how we got so political, but okay.
Well, but it goes. I mean, all this stuff cycles back through. It's like back to the original conversation. I don't know if it was last episode or this episode, but it's like the industry, right? The addiction industry has been set up in a way where the frontline worker gets paid the least.
Right.
And which I understand, right, from a business perspective. Like, okay, fine, the person who's bringing in the money should get paid the most. You know, I get that, right? Because they're responsible for everybody else, pretty much. But on the flip side of the coin, like, we have this system where, like you said, it takes so long to go into debt to then help the people in need.
Right.
And, you know, like for us at Surfside, it's so tricky because, you know, I'm really, really, really resistant, even though the board has told me I should, to raising cost. I'm really, really resistant. But I have to pay my employees a comparable salary to what all the local rehabs are paying. And, you know, when the place down the street is collecting $1,500 a day on out-of-network benefits, and their people are getting paid a little bit more, that sucks.
Yeah.
You know, when it's like, when we're not even talking our day rate versus day rate. We are not even talking apples and oranges. We're talking apples and peanut butter.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's food, sure, but it's like
not
super different.
Right.
So,
and you know, and so even for your clients, like you want them to go back to school to fulfill that dream, and that often becomes an almost impossible task unless mommy and daddy can pay for it. Because it's hard to listen. I
tell parents not to. I tell the guys to take their own loans. But
well, I mean, if you're 20, if you're too young, you may not even have the credit score to do that.
I stopped going to college because it seemed like a worthless venture. Like I had probably about $30,000 in student loans. All I have is an associate's degree and a certificate in like horticulture and plant management. But it was better for me to take my credit and apply it towards buying equipment and then running a business for myself.
But you also, some of the stuff you learned was in college, right? For your job.
No.
High school?
High school.
Oh, high school. All right.
High school.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I was in high school. I graduated high school in 2009. I mean, since 2009 to now, like all the technology has changed. The principles and stuff are the same, but most of the shit I learn and stuff I do for my clients, I've learned off of YouTube.
YouTube, yeah. I learned so much from YouTube. And so, you know, just to bring it full circle, I think that, you know, we want to create a society where no matter how fucked up it is, how shitty the cards you've been dealt, you have equal access to opportunity, right? And I think that some of the Democratic candidates also believe that. And some of the Republican candidates say shit like, you know, my dad gave me a small loan of $5 million to start my business, and I'm self-made. And I try to keep the personalities out of politics. I don't want to.
And I'm self-made.
Yeah. I think that I try to look at people's political decisions and what they do. And, you know, I love some things that Trump has done. I hated some of the things that Obama has done. But I think that people in recovery, if everybody that was in recovery, that was affected by addiction, that lost somebody in addiction, voted together,
we would change the
we would be the second biggest voting bloc behind women.
Yeah.
Right? But that's not what we do. We don't pay attention. We don't get involved. So if you're listening to this, please get involved and vote. If you're not registered to vote, get registered to vote. You know, find out whether or not you can vote if you have a criminal justice pass. You know, get your friends to register to vote because, you know, we live in a society where every 2 years we can vote a lot of people out of office if they're doing a bad job, and that's not what we do. Yeah. You know, we're all pissed off about the way things are happening, and we don't do shit about it. And you know, that's really what I've dedicated my life to, is identifying people that give shit about this, educating them, and then activating them to be part of change. You know, because somebody's access to detox is affected by politics, not just personal choice. Yeah. And we all have to think about that. And I think we all have a responsibility to do that.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Thank you for having me again for the second episode. Absolutely.
Awesome. We'll see you next week.
Cowabunga.
As always, if you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out to Surfside. You can give us a call at 609-709-4205 or get us on the web at surfside.org.